Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Briancrombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, it's a real pleasure of mine tonight to reconnect with an old friend of mine, Monica Clare, who's had just a fascinating career, done a whole bunch of interesting things, and today is a coach, a management consultant and coach in a bunch of different areas. She runs something called Monica Clare Management Consultant. She coaches companies on corporate social responsibility. She coaches families on family business disputes. She's been educated in trauma-induced conflict, and so she's going to talk a little bit about leadership and how unresolved trauma causes some leadership issues. She spent a fair amount of time in Europe, where she's been very involved in a bunch of different organizations, especially with international affairs and foreign affairs. And so I think she's going to express some points of view on what's going on in Ukraine and trauma-induced leadership. Monica Clare, welcome to our show. How are you?
Thank you, Brian. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well. It's been a while.
It has been a while. We were just saying it's almost 30 years since the last time we talked.
Unbelievable. Well, it's great to see you. And you look like 30 years younger, not my age, that's for sure. So that's wonderful. So tell me, what does Monica Clare Management Consulting do?
Monica Clare Management Consultant obviously is me. And what I do is I help people figure out why they're fighting, basically. What are the conflicts in their organization, in their personal lives, and what's the source of those conflicts?
And this is personal as well as company.
It's all connected. In my experience, it's like a 360-degree thing. Like if you've got problems in your company, it's something in your personal life as well.
And how long have you been doing this?
Let's see. I would say since around 2004. So
a while.
18 years. Yeah.
So you've got really quite the background. You've got a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from the University of Western Ontario. You're a chartered professional accountant, a CPA in Canada. You've got an MBA from York University Schulich School of Business, and then you've got something from the Diplomat Academy of Vienna, an ISc in International Global Studies. Sounds impressive. And then we're a coach with Executive Coach with the Next Step Coaching. Your business, an executive coach with Solstice Coaching and Consulting. You worked as an AGM with CoolJet Inc., an associate with the PACE Network, a manager business transition services with BDO Canada. And for the last 15 years, you've been with Monica Clare Management Consultants. And you were telling me that you've spent quite a while in Europe.
Yeah, almost about 20 years.
And all over Europe.
All over. Yeah.
Tell us where some of the places were.
Oh, geez. Well, let's see. I started in Germany, then went to Hungary, and then I went to Italy. I've been in Greece and France, Spain, Switzerland, Liechtenstein. Let's see, Romania, Hungary,
Sicily.
Sicily is part of Italy.
Okay.
Austria, obviously, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia.
And this was traveled or business or a combination thereof?
Combination.
Fantastic.
It started out as just travel and then evolved into business.
And tell us about this course that you took in Vienna.
Yeah, so it was interesting. The first 4 years of traveling around Europe, I was really just exploring the cultures and the people, learning more about the different perspectives. This is another conversation we can have about the bubble I grew up in Canada. When I got over to Europe, I recognized the bubble that I was in. But after 4 years, I had a car over there. It was stolen, which kind of forced me to settle down. And I had my eye on the Diplomatic Academy. And what I was curious about was really understanding what was going on a world level, like on a systems level. And the Diplomatic Academy offered that opportunity for me to understand all the world systems.
And what do you mean the world systems?
So the United Nations, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, NATO, the World Bank, all of those ones, and even the financial institutions and the connection between the financial institutions and the economy, because my background, as you know, is in, I studied economics and I was an accountant, so I did a lot of financial analysis, and I wanted to understand the connection to businesses and those world systems.
Fascinating. And I think that you've got a point of view on that the world system isn't working today in regards to the United Nations Security Council. We're going to take a break and come back. And we're going to talk, first of all, I think a little bit more about your consulting and coaching business, particularly in regards to this unresolved trauma that you believe is the source of so much of this conflict. And then maybe in the second segment, we'll talk a little bit more about world systems. We're going to take a break, everyone. Come back with Monica Clare in just about a minute and a half. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So, this nighttime gig that I've got as a radio host really is wonderful because it gets me to meet some fascinating people and reacquaint myself with some fascinating people that I've met over the years. And Monica Clare is one of those people. I met her, I hate to admit it, 30 years ago or so, when she did an MBA at the Schulich School of Business. And she was one of the most impressive young ladies that I met during that time, and very smart. She had an undergraduate in economics, and she was an accountant, and she was starring in the MBA. And she knew her stuff, and she would end up coming over to the house frequently for dinners and drinks and conversations and things like that. And it's wonderful to see you again and reacquaint with what's going on. It sounds like your travels around Europe were really quite fascinating. But this idea that you're coaching companies and coaching people on disputes to try to resolve these disputes, and they're based on unresolved trauma, is absolutely fascinating. Tell me, what's this about unresolved trauma? Like, what gives?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did a dive into was it's all biology. So there's something in our nervous system, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard of something called Polyvagal Theory.
No.
And what Polyvagal Theory, it talks about our nervous system and how when we are overwhelmed by a situation, so we're traumatized. Like, trauma isn't the event, it's our reaction to the event. So our nervous system gets overwhelmed and we can't cope with whatever's happening. Right? So what happens to our nervous system, and this is our very intelligent survival mechanism, it shuts down a part of our nervous system because we just can't cope with whatever's happening. Right? If that doesn't get addressed at some point, it stays shut down. And you'll notice, at least I've noticed with a lot of my clients, is that they can't feel parts of themselves. Like there's parts of their bodies that they can't feel, or emotionally they're just disconnected from what's happening. Those are symptoms of trauma that's sitting in their nervous system. It has never been released. So what happens to that energy that comes up when you're scared or overwhelmed? It comes up, and when you shut it down, it's like a soccer ball that's been kicked and it gets frozen in midair. It just stays there. And that's in your nervous system. So it's like this. So you get this tension and you're just like uptight. If that doesn't get released, eventually, at some point in your journey, another event will happen that will trigger a reaction that's related to that past experience. So your nervous system,
you relieve the trauma again or something?
You relive it. You're literally reliving the experience. Right? So there's something coming up, and then it's like frozen away. Something happens, and you've got this explosion of emotions that seems very disconnected from what's really happening. And a lot of people refer to this to the fight, flight, freeze response.
Yep.
Have you heard of that?
Yep.
So depending on how empowered you feel in that moment, you're either going to attack the person, you're going to run away from the person, or if you really don't feel empowered, you're just going to shut down.
Right.
You just freeze, right? And again, those are very intelligent survival mechanisms. It's just in our DNA.
Okay. So this trauma that one had a while ago, something triggers it, and this creates current disputes in businesses and personal life?
Yeah. There's an overreaction to the actual situation because in our biology, and I don't know if you, because this is a radio show, but there's when we're aroused, our brain function gets diminished, right? So we need to react physically. So our cognitive functioning is actually decreased. So we can't stay engaged in a rational conversation.
So we get too emotional.
We get the emotions take over, and the physical reaction that I need to fight or run away or in some way protect myself, that takes over. So I can no longer stay socially engaged with you and actually hear what you're saying, actually feel how you're feeling, because I'm so involved in my own protection mechanism.
And so your coaching and consulting is just saying to people, calm down, don't get so upset.
No, that doesn't work. That never works. It's not about saying calm down. It's about saying,
I hate it when you tell me to calm down.
Yeah, it's like, oh, wow, I can really feel how upset you are right now. Like, so I can really feel how scared you are or how angry you are. And that's something called co-regulation. So it's
So
called
you're reinforcing someone's trauma. You're enabling it. You're amplifying it. No?
Nope. I'm just meeting it. So I'm just recognizing that it's here, right? So I use my nervous system that's in a calm state, meet you where you are in an aroused state, and help you come down into a more calm state. But I don't tell you what to do. I just recognize where you're at. And this was the piece that was missing when the trauma happened initially, that there was nobody there to help you
regulate,
calm down.
So it comes back to this whole thing. It's not necessarily what happens to you, it's how you react to what happens to you.
Exactly.
It's the issue. Okay. And so therefore, either in companies or in personal lives, you get involved in trying to calm people down without saying, I'm trying to calm you down.
Actually, no, at the beginning, because when I have an engagement, I explain to people there's an education piece about this. So I tell them, this is what's happening. It's a biological function. It's an intelligent survival mechanism that we've never learned how to self-regulate. And we can only learn how to self-regulate initially through co-regulation. And this is actually what parents do with children. When parents have children that get upset, if the parent stays calm and helps the child, regulate their nervous system, that's the co-regulation mechanism that an adult that's in a position of power to protect the child helps co-regulate the child's nervous system. And eventually the child learns how to do that by self-regulating. But if the parents didn't know how to do it with the child never learns it. And this is generations.
And so if the parent yells at the kids or gets mad at the kids, you're just making it worse.
It makes it worse.
That's what I've always found. There's no question. Fascinating. How'd you get into this?
My own journey. So when my parents had a manufacturing company and they were getting older, this is when I came back to Canada to help them transition from their managing of the company to my managing of the company. I couldn't believe all of the anxiety that was coming up. There was so much conflict in our relationship that was absolutely having an impact on the company. And even with all my training with business and coaching and mediation, I couldn't do it. I was like, wow. And I could see it. I said, wow, my childhood traumas are coming up to the surface. So I was in my 50s and I felt like I was 15 years old again. And I was like, what is this? So that led me to really do some more research. And that's when I found out this thing about trauma and how it gets activated and it just takes over the whole space.
So your parents were treating you like you were a 15-year-old, or you felt like you were a 15-year-old?
Both. I mean, I felt like I was 15. They were treating me like I was 15. And then I started acting like I was 15. And I was like, what is going on here?
And how did you get out of it? Other than the training, how'd you get out of it? Did you have to find someone to regulate your
I did. I got a lot of help. I did, because I work a lot with energy, and I had some energy healing like Reiki and things like that. But I also did some traditional therapy. But the training that I've done now has helped me really go deep into the trauma and the intergenerational trauma. Because one of the other things that I've learned, it's not just my childhood trauma. it's not just my childhood trauma that comes up, it's also intergenerational. So I inherit in my nervous system, I inherit through my DNA the trauma that my parents went through, my
Oh, come
grandparents.
on. How do you inherit trauma in your DNA?
This is a science called epigenetics. And it's a relatively new science. I would say it was about 2007, I believe, is when it first came into the mainstream. It's still being researched, but the early research is showing really clear evidence that in our DNA, there are these tags, and it's called mylation. The way we react to things emotionally is having an impact on our DNA. And if that trauma response is over a longer period of time, it stays that way, and it actually gets passed down to your children.
Well, that's interesting because I had a relationship with someone that that was Eastern European, and I was English Scottish, and she would often say that I was so calm and she was so hot headed, and it was because of my English Scottish blood and her Eastern European blood, where getting very emotional was sort of standard modus operandi.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I had a relationship with an Italian, and it was the same thing. Like even though I have an Eastern European background, I guess because of my training, I've managed to stay calm, and maybe there's something naturally about me like that way. But the Italian reactions to things was like, I thought they were going to kill each other. I couldn't believe the emotions that would come up. But yeah, there is something it's a cultural thing as well.
In addition, you do consulting in corporate social responsibility?
It's all connected. So it's not specifically called corporate social responsibility, but when I do consulting, it really is about leadership. And leadership means serving the people that you're working with. So serving your family, serving your company, but also serving your community. It's just different layers of the same thing. And it takes time to get to that place, because first of all, the leaders have to be okay with themselves, so taking care of themselves. And when they're okay and clear about their purpose and knowing the resources that they have available for their well-being, then they're able to take care of the other people in their family, and then in their company, and then in the broader community.
So the word serving is kind of interesting. Some people would think leaders are ordering people around or managing them or directing them, but you're saying they're serving them. Explain serving.
In my perspective, a true leader is there to serve. That's the role of a true leader. They are put in that position to take care of the people.
Isn't like a servant or someone that serves typically thought of as the lower on the rung individual?
Yeah. There's a sense of humility, of being humble in a true leadership role.
Well, it's interesting. We've had, and we're going to skip ahead maybe to the next conversation we're going to have, but I've seen a bunch of memes of late that you probably have as well on social media of the different leadership styles between the president of Ukraine and the president of Russia, where Putin is sitting on the tank and he's whipping the people that are pulling the tank or the truck or whatever in front of him, versus the president of Ukraine who's out there leading the people that are pulling the tank. And it's what kind of leader are you? One that orders versus one that truly is at the front of the pack.
Exactly. And in my experience, a true leader that serves has healed their trauma and recognizes the responsibility that they have here in this world. And if you look at Putin's childhood, and I know that we don't have a lot of information, but there's some clear childhood trauma, and even in his journey, the way he was trained by the KGB. I mean, there's so much trauma that he's been inundated with. It's not a surprise when you get somebody that's got that much trauma, when they get into a position of power, that they're going to abuse other people. Because there's an old saying that hurt people hurt people.
Hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line I've heard recently quite a bit called a trauma bond. What is a trauma bond?
That's interesting. I haven't heard that particular term. Can you tell me more?
I don't know. So I maybe it's.
I mean, when I hear that, the thing that comes to my mind is that what often happens, and this is very common in marriages, is that we're attracted to the other person for a lot of good reasons, but there's also some shadow reasons in our attraction to that person. And those shadow reasons, when they come to the surface, is when the conflicts come up. Right. And I also tell people that when there's a conflict, it's like if you and I have a conflict, it's because my trauma just met your trauma.
My trauma just met your trauma. What does that mean?
It means that there's something in my history and my nervous system that's never been resolved. And there's something in your history and your nervous system that's never been resolved. And there's something between us that when they meet, there's a connection. And that maybe that's the trauma bond. There's a connection between our two traumas that says it's time. If we know what it is and if we have the skills to do it, it's time for that trauma to be healed. If we don't know what it is and we don't know how to do it, that trauma is just that conflict is just going to escalate.
Fascinating. Sounds interesting.
But there's definitely a connection. Maybe that's the trauma bond.
We're chatting tonight with Monica Clare, who runs Monica Clare Management Consulting. She's a management consultant and a coach in disputes, in corporate social responsibility, disputes both personally and in business. And it sounds like you do a lot of work on leadership. You also mentioned that you did do some work that you've been giving a lot of thought to recently in regards to international institutions. And we're going to take a break and come back and talk a little bit about that and how you think it applies to our current situation in Ukraine and Russia. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Monica Clare. She runs Monica Clare Management Consulting. She's a consultant and a coach in disputes, in trauma, in leadership, in corporate responsibility. Sounds quite fascinating. And also, you said that you do a fair amount of work in family disputes with family businesses, which is interesting. But Monica, you said that you took some courses in Europe when you were there and got very involved in understanding international institutions and how they worked. And what you said just before we got on the show is that you feared that our international institutions were currently failing us. Tell me what you know about international institutions, what you learned, what you have come to the realization about, and why you think they're failing us today.
Well, this is a really big topic. So first of all, the international institutions that we have today were all created after World War II. So right away, I mean, they were great. They were great ideas, and it was the best we could do at the time. But they and they didn't know how to deal with the trauma from the war anyway, but this is what was created. And there were a lot of holes in those institutional charters that we've always known about, but we didn't know what to do about them. And now they're coming to light. So the big one right now is the United Nations Security Council, and the fact that Russia got allowed to be on the Security Council with a veto vote. And everybody always knew that if there was ever a rogue state on the Security Council, there was nothing in the charter that could deal with that. And so this is what's happening right now. And I won't go into the other deals because the other ones right now, because this is the critical one right now that so this situation in the Ukraine right now is bringing it to light and saying, yes, it's here. What are we going to do about it? So something will have to change. All of the organizations are going to have to reevaluate their charters, and I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know how they're going to change them, but something will have to change because they're either going to collapse completely or redefine themselves in some way. And we'll see what that is, but it's not a surprise in some way. It's disappointing. It's very sad, but it's not a surprise. But the other thing that's important to recognize is that these institutions, these charters were designed, like I said, after World War II. All of the trauma these are called collective traumas, like the wars were collective traumas, genocide, all of these things are called collective traumas. They've never been addressed. And until we address them, they're going to keep popping up. So if they manage to reinvent themselves, they're going to have to address these collective traumas that are embedded in the charters.
So the United Nations has never had a offensive military capability. It's only been, and frankly, hasn't even had a defensive military capability. It's only been a peacekeeping force. NATO has a defensive military capability, and some people think that actually what Putin was trying to do is break NATO apart. But what he may have actually accomplished that NATO is more unified today than it ever has been.
Yep.
What do you
That
think about that?
backfired. That backfired on him. I think Putin did us a huge favor from that respect, that gave NATO a new purpose. And even the United Nations, in a weird way, when things like this happen, there's always a positive thing. And so what this has done for NATO and the UN is forced them to take a look at themselves and say, because they were falling apart there's no question. The UN was just a quagmire of political infighting. It wasn't working very well. It was kind of limping along. NATO was kind of limping along. So this event is really waking up a lot of people, saying we need to get our act together and figure this out. The other thing that's really interesting that is the I don't know if you've seen, the UK passed a law about investigating money laundering in the UK. And this has been going on for decades. So that comes back to the corporate social responsibility, that it's all connected. Our international organizations, our international laws, the International Criminal Court, all of these things are interconnected. But as individual countries have allowed things to get sloppy and not following international law, then this is what it leads to. So I think this is an opportunity for every country and every citizen of every country to really take a look at ourselves and say, have we been following the laws? Have we been responsible in our activities?
Well, the International Criminal Court has also come into the news. Ukraine has sued Russia in that court, I understand, for a couple of things. One would be an illegal war, but the second would be crimes against humanity, crimes against human rights. And that International Criminal Court is something that Russia, I guess, after 2014, withdrew from because they were found guilty even then. But to be found guilty by an International Criminal Court has got to be impactful, don't you think?
So Russia doesn't buy into it, so it doesn't have any direct impact on Russia in Russia. But what would happen is if the government or government officials of Russia traveled to other countries that abided by the International Criminal Court of Law, they would be immediately arrested. So that is the impact. It's going to take a while for that to happen, and it's a question of, will they be able to get around that? And of course, the average Russian maybe say, no, I won't be able to get around that. But those rich oligarchs, absolutely, they can get around that. I mean, there's no question that they've got friends in places that will help them. And again, this comes back to us as the Western countries, if we want to make that distinction between East and West, that are trying to follow the rule of law. Are we actually going to follow the rule of law?
Well, I guess as we continue, and Canada's not, but certainly Europe is still buying Russian oil and gas. It's a little bit inconsistent to be sending armaments to Ukraine to fight Russian invasion and forces, and at the same time buying Russian oil and gas, is it not?
Yeah, but what else are they going to do? They're dependent on it. So this comes back to environmental policy and energy policy. So Europe made the decision to be dependent on that oil and gas instead of investing in alternative energy sources, so they wouldn't be dependent on it. And again, I mean, it's all connected. So it's late, but they could shift with some help from other countries to get off of that dependency for that supply. But right now, people would freeze if it's still winter in Europe. If they didn't have the oil and gas, they would freeze.
So, your trauma comment is kind of interesting, and certainly, and I haven't read Mein Kampf, but I've certainly read lots of descriptions of Mein Kampf, that some of the motivation for Hitler was the reparations against Germany after World War I that he felt were completely inappropriate. And it would appear, and I don't know, is that trauma? But it certainly seemed like that was one of the motivations that he had, was to get back at the Allied forces and the Allied countries because of those reparations that he thought had destroyed Germany in the 20s and 30s after World War I. And Putin, it would appear, feels sort of the same way about everything that happened after the fall of the USSR in 1989, and the isolation of Russia, the breakup of the Soviet Union, the fact that so many countries that were former republics in the Soviet Union joined NATO, and he wanted to stop that, and he's trying to recreate the old Rus, which was, I guess, 500 years ago, Russia and Ukraine together. Not something that was very recent, certainly the Soviet Union. How do you deal with trauma if we think the problem is the trauma that Hitler had or the trauma that Putin had? How the heck do we possibly deal with that?
Yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. We don't have any easy answers for that. The first step, because it's a pretty new field, is this trauma-informed leadership, trauma-informed collaboration. The first step is being aware that it's here. The next step is being more sensitive so you can actually feel it. And then the third step is integration. And on a collective trauma level, we're still learning how to do that, right? So it's not an easy process. I've been part of the process a couple of times. It's amazing. The person I'm training with, I've seen him work with people, like 900 people in the room, where you can feel the whole room just shift, where like a big chunk of the Holocaust trauma, for example, just got released and healed. But it's layers and layers and layers. If you think of the history of humanity and all the horrible things we've done to each other, that's a lot of trauma. That's a lot of trauma.
Well, and I find it like stupidly shocking that Putin thinks he can actually attack Ukraine, kill and destroy its citizens and cities, and think that they're going to want to then become his countrymen.
Yeah.
Like that's bizarre.
Yeah, but that's a clear trauma symptom. Like, he's out of touch with reality. He can't see it. He's in his own little bubble.
Okay, so we've got trauma leadership, we've got corporate social responsibility, we've got disputes, we've got international institutions that aren't working. You're a real ray of sunshine.
Yeah. Well, the hope is that this healing work does work. It does actually shift. So I've had wonderful experiences with my clients where once they learn about this, and it starts with the individual, right? It starts with each one of us does our own work. And if you get a group of people together who say, yeah, we want to do this work together. And a lot of families actually do want to be happy families. This is nice to know. And if they've got a business involved, they've got an economic incentive to make it work. So when you get a group of people in the room that love each other and really want to make it work, that intention, along with the facilitation and the skills that they learn, it's a game changer. So you see the whole family system change. You see them communicating with each other, recognizing that when the conflict is there, it's something in them. So they take responsibility for it. So they're showing up in a different way. The communication is smoother, and that transfers into a healthier, happier, whole, well-being kind of life that they can live as a family, and that translates into their business activities.
Now, in this process, are you getting them to relive the trauma and whatever the experience was, or are you just sort of getting them to calm down and not overreact to the trauma?
So the process,
trigger again.
Yes, after the education piece, so they know what's happening, and we'll have a conversation and say, so what's happening with you, right? Like, what's going on? And then there's the story around it. And then once the story gets spoken out, then I'll say, okay, what are you feeling emotionally and what are you feeling physically? Because it's a physical thing. It's in our bodies. Trauma's in our bodies. So they start to become more and more
How
aware.
does trauma stay in your bodies?
Because there's a physical reaction. I don't know if you've ever noticed when you're scared, you get tense.
But then it goes away.
You think it does.
You think it's still there?
It depends on how deep the trauma is.
So maybe we just need more massages. We should just order some massages for
Massages are great. I'm a big fan of massages. But again, it's a temporary thing. If there's not that, the massage is just to release the tension, but it doesn't heal the trauma. There's a connection between the physical, the emotional, and the story. There's a narrative around it, right? So I get the story, and you connect the physical and emotional reactions connected to the story, and you first of all, you get calmed down in your body because there's some breathing, you breathe into it so that you're not so tense. You start to put some space around it. You feel safe. You recognize that there's actually nothing happening in this moment.
And you said that with your own parents and the dispute with your business, you were feeling like you were a 15-year-old and they were treating you like a 15-year-old, and there were some disputes, and it was all based on trauma and intergenerational trauma. Has that all been solved?
A lot of it has. I mean, I don't know if it'll ever all be solved. I mean, that's because I'm going back generations. You can see the pictures behind me. These are my grandparents and my great grandparents, and touching into the stuff that I've inherited, that my parents inherited. It's layers and layers and layers. We're at a point now where we've got a great relationship. When something comes up, it's like, okay, I know what that is, and we've got the skills to get through it and move on. So there's the rupture and repair in every relationship that keeps it going. So we're at that stage right now.
We're chatting tonight with Monica Clare of Monica Clare Consulting. She's a coach and consultant in trauma, in leadership, and personal social responsibility, and family business disputes. And she's got some interesting point of view on our international institutions and how they're failing us today, particularly the Security Council at the United Nations. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Monica Clare of Monica Clare Management Consulting. She is a management consultant, a coach. She coaches people and businesses in a whole wealth of different things in regards to dispute resolution, family businesses and their disputes, leadership, trauma, unresolved trauma, and corporate social responsibility. So it sounds interesting. Monica, if people want to reach out to you to access your services, do you have a website, or what's the best way to contact you?
I do have a website. It's monica-clare.ca. That's
and
probably the best way.
On there, your different services.
I'm on LinkedIn.
On there, your different services are outlined?
The majority of them are. I'm just in the process of revamping the website, but the main things are there, yeah.
Awesome. Do you miss traveling around Europe?
I do. I managed to get over there for 4 months last summer, which was a real treat. And then
Where'd you go?
For 3 weeks. Oh, I went to the Netherlands, Germany, Romania, Hungary, Italy. Yeah.
I joked a couple minutes ago that you were a ray of sunshine because you actually, talked about a lot of negative things in regards to trauma and disputes and unresolved trauma and intergenerational trauma, and the trauma lives within our body, and the failure of our international institutions and things like that. We're in a pretty strange situation. I remember just around the time that we met, Francis Fukuyama wrote a famous article at the end of history that he thought that the fall of the Berlin Wall suggested that sort of the history was over, and democracy and capitalism had won out. And you know what? In the last little while, the rise of China and the belts and suspenders, or belts and roads, or whatever it's called, strategy, and their new form of politics, and clearly what's going on in Russia and Ukraine right now, suggests that whatever Francis Fukuyama thought had ended has not ended, and it's continuing. Do you have a message for everyone in regards to either and or both, our personal problems, where truckers, convoys can take over our country, and people think about white supremacy and political extremism on both the left and the right, as well as what's going on in Eastern Europe, as well as what's going on in too many people's personal lives? Do you have a message for us all?
Well, I love that you brought in Francis Fukuyama and the democracy winning out. And in my view, democracy is still just a dream. We cannot have a true democracy without mature citizens. And mature citizens for me are people who are at least working on healing their trauma so that they can take responsibility and show up in a democracy. We don't have that yet anywhere on the planet. So democracy hasn't won because it doesn't exist anywhere yet. So my encouragement is that now that we know we've got science to back up the information about trauma in our bodies, that we can recognize it's here, we can heal it, and we can become mature citizens and be true leaders as serving our families and serving our communities and serving this planet.
Okay, and the ways to deal with both trauma and triggers that can bring the trauma back are number one, getting educated on what trauma is.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is finding someone that can help you regulate your reaction to the triggers, and without calming you down, without saying they're going to calm you down, effectively calming you down and helping you not overreact. Number three, I think what you've suggested is massage works. So
massage, walks in nature, hanging out with a friend and having a nice conversation, going to the beach, whatever works for you to help you feel good
and calm down.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I have a lot of hope. There's a lot of people doing the work that I do. It's growing. We're learning more and more all the time, developing better, faster tools to help more and more people. So I have a lot of hope.
Monica, Clare, thank you so much for joining us on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure to see you again after so long. If you're ever in the Toronto area, I hope you look me up and drop by. And I hope that you take your message of healing trauma out there. Some people would say that Putin's problem is small man syndrome, or some people would have a more derogatory term about that. But what you're suggesting is that maybe he actually had some sort of trauma and he's got to heal it. And I'm not suggesting we have any sympathy for him because of that, but it sort of puts it into a slightly different frame of mind when you think about that. Anyway, real pleasure. Thank you so much. That's our show for tonight, everyone. I'm on every Monday through Friday, the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 at 6 p.m. You can get me on your AM dial. I know those still exist at 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Tilsonburg, at www.saga960am.ca. You can get all my videos on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel. You can subscribe for it and get all my videos sent to you. And all my podcasts are on Audible Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Speakeasy Podcasts, as well as on my website, briancrombie.com. As I said, Monica, it's a real pleasure that I get to meet new people, and it's wonderful that I get to revisit with old friends. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's our show. Good night, everybody.